Welcome to Type C Tech Reviews. Today we're going to be doing a review of the Alienware AW3423DW. If at any point during the video you want to check out this exact same monitor, there's Dell.com links below where you can pick it up, which I think is the only place you can pick it up, but let's jump into the video. All right, now right away, this is a very premium 34-inch ultrawide with a resolution of 3440 by 1440p, aka basically ultrawide 21:9 1440p. Now the PPI, or pixels per inch, essentially how crisp and clear the image is actually going to be to your eye, is pretty good here at about 109. Now this is typical for most 34-inch ultrawides because they share the same resolution. Most of them do, 99% or 95%. So this means overall the image is going to be nice, crisp, and clear. Small text is going to be clear, but it's not going to be overly crispy like a 4K resolution would be at the screen size. However, the PPI does not tell the full story here because there is a big difference between this monitor versus basically all of other monitors on the market, especially ultrawides, and that is this has a glossy finish, whereas most have a matte finish on them. Now, matte finishes typically, this isn't talked about a lot, but matte finishes will kind of fuzzy the image out. It will make it less crispy to varying levels depending on the manufacturer and depending on each individual monitor. When you have a glossy screen, you don't have that fuzziness. So it's very crisp compared to a matte finish monitor, which is an awesome thing. And basically every monitor, every gaming monitor should have a glossy option rather than that matte finish option. But let's continue on. And the panel type, this is the reason you're going to be interested in this monitor at all, which is a QD-OLED, which basically stands for, or the QD part of it stands for quantum dot. So quantum dot, if you don't know what that is, all it's doing is adding a layer into the panel itself that is going to basically increase its color gamut. That's basically the main purpose for the quantum dot, and it does a good job of that, obviously, because this monitor's colors, we'll get to it. Also, if you're worried about burn-in, we're gonna do a separate section on burn-in for this monitor, so stick around for that. And as well, finishing it up with the panel type and all of that stuff, this does have a curve of 1800R. So it's not super curved like a lot of Samsung monitors are. However, it is pretty nicely curved. It's like a good amount of like curve where it's not too much if you're just working. It's good. Okay, if you're used to 34-inch ultrawides that are curved, this is going to be pretty much the same as that. Most of them are in this level, same kind of curvature. Moving on to refresh rate, this goes all the way up to 175 hertz, which is awesome. But then moving on with that, this has full G-Sync Ultimate built in, which is awesome. This also works with FreeSync, which is very cool in case you're on those other cards. But is screen tearing an issue? Absolutely not. There is none, as we would expect with this monitor. But now let's move on to the brightness. Oh yes, this is quite good. Now, I have looked around at other reviews of this monitor, and some reviewers have been reporting testing of around 250 nits for the brightness. I'm not sure exactly how they got that. The actual rating for typical content is 250 nits, which is very low. That's low. However, after my testing, this thing is hitting 600 nits, which is very good. 600 nits all the time, all day long in typical SDR content, which is great. This is a very bright monitor, even in brighter rooms. We'll actually talk a little bit more about this, but in brighter rooms, you're not gonna have any problem with reflections, even though this is glossy. However, this panel lacks a polarizing layer, which basically means that black levels that you're going to get with the OLED, which is a big reason you're gonna get an OLED, those black levels aren't as deep in a bright room because it lacks a polarizing layer. So most of the time I was finding myself, even though I wasn't seeing any reflections, I was finding myself turning the lights off because it overall just makes the image such a beautiful contrasty image. So if you are gaming, you're probably gonna want it in a dark room. That being said, doing typical desktop style work, maybe editing some pictures, stuff like that, this wasn't an issue and I could leave it on even in a very bright room. However, again, if you do want to game, I personally wanted to turn the lights off. I was feeling the need to when gaming. Okay, but now what about HDR? Well, it's good. It's not quite as good as I was expecting. However, it does meet that HDR 1000 rating, which is 1000 nits of brightness. However, it's really in smaller areas of the screen. It's never gonna hit that 1000 nit brightness with huge, white areas of the screen. It's really for smaller highlights of your screen. The HDR also does constantly shift brightness. You never really notice it in games or movies, stuff like that, but if you're on desktop, you notice it However, I don't know why you would have HDR when you're on your desktop. That being said, I think the HDR is good, although most of the time I was finding myself using SDR most of the time. In games like Forza Horizon 5, it did an excellent job of just giving you that high dynamic range and pair it with the color gamut, which is quite good. And it's an overall really good experience. I wouldn't say it's the best experience out there, and I wouldn't say it would be the reason to get this monitor because of the HDR, but the SDR is where it's at. That's what I use most of the time. But overall, the point is the brightness is stunning. You're not gonna have an issue with brightness, but most of the time to get the best picture quality possible, you are gonna want it in a dark or a darker room. Okay, so a pretty dim room. All right, but moving on to colors. Colors are absolutely fantastic here, covering 99.3% of the DCI-P3 color gamut. But not only that, this comes pre-calibrated, which you kind of do expect at this price point, but it comes pre-calibrated very, very well. The white tones are very accurate out of the box, which is something that is very important. Even if you're not gonna do color accurate work, the white tones are the thing that you're gonna notice right away. So those are really good out of the box. If you wanna do professional photo and video editing, this is ready out of the box. Now, if you are operating the Adobe RGB color gamut, this does lack a little bit in that color gamut. But if you're editing YouTube videos, if you're editing thumbnails like I do on a daily basis, which I use this monitor for, this is absolutely fantastic for that, especially if you're using the DCI-P3 color gamut. Also, I do want to say, if you are a game by night and work by day, and you switch between a PC, an Xbox, a PS5, and let's say a Mac, something like that, this absolutely works for that. Most new Macs, Mac Minis, MacBook Pros and stuff will plug into this and work quite well. All right, but now let's talk about 8-bit, 10-bit, and 12-bit color. So first of all, this can output 12 bits of color. I think this is probably for Dolby Vision, which is what Dolby Vision is optimized for, in 12 bits of color, which is like 83 billion. I might be wrong about that. Don't quote me, but I'm not actually sure if this is a 10-bit native panel and then they do frame rate control to get it up to 12 bits of color. I'm not sure about that, so don't quote me. However, you can output 8 bits of color in its full 175 hertz. However, you have to move it down to 144 hertz to get 10 bits of color. I believe this is a bandwidth issue. But then if you want to get 12 bits of color, you have to bump it down to 120 hertz. Although overall, you're still keeping over 100 hertz, getting maximum 12-bit color, which is still a good thing. So I'm not gonna knock it too much for that, but I do wish that it could have done 10-bit at 175 hertz. But again, I think that's just the DisplayPort connection not having enough bandwidth. And obviously those levels are going to vary if you're using the HDMI versus DisplayPort. Okay, but now the contrast ratio, which is absolutely fantastic. It's basically infinite. The blacks, if you don't know, on an OLED, if it's a total black, the pixel itself will turn off. So the dark areas of the screen will be off. But again, in lighter environments, it doesn't have a polarizing layer. So even though it's technically, the pixels are technically off, you will still get some kind of, it's almost like reflection, and it decreases the contrast ratio. So if you do want those super deep OLED blacks, which are just beautiful, especially in night racing, in Forza Horizon 5, that looks so good. But yeah, in that, you're gonna wanna turn those lights down, maybe put some blinds on the windows, something like that. However, I do wanna stress this is not at all a deal breaker, and it was very easy. However, I do also mainly game at night most of the time, so it was kind of easier for me. So you'll just have to weigh that yourself. Okay, but now the response time, ghosting, and input lag. First of all, the response time hits a 0.1 millisecond gray to gray response time, which is super fast. OLEDs are. How does that equate to ghosting? Well, there's none. Previously, I've said on some very high-end IPS panels that I reviewed, most of them by LG, that they have basically none, where it's imperceivable when you're gaming and you can only see it a tiny bit during ghosting tests, controlled ghosting tests. This has none. However, the difference between a high-end IPS and this OLED is imperceivable during gameplay. Even though this has none and then some IPS has basically none, it doesn't really make any difference during gameplay. I game on a high-end IPS, which is my main monitor that I use between reviews. This one, it doesn't really make any difference as far as like ghosting, smearing, stuff like that. However, it is nice to know that this is crystal clear, absolutely perfect, which is fantastic. Now let's talk about input lag. Input lag was low. Not quite as low as I was expecting. There are definitely a lot of LG IPS ultrawides do have slightly lower input lag than this, but this is still at such a low level that you won't ever notice it. Unless you are a serious, like, it's your job to be a competitive gamer, this probably isn't the thing for you, but even if you're playing competitive games like Warzone, Apex, whatever, you're not gonna notice it, even if you play really, really well. So this still has very low input lag, which is great. Okay, but now overall gaming experience. We're not talking about speed here, we're just talking about the experience of gaming. It's kind of a new section, but I wanna do it for this monitor because it's perfect. A lot of times when I use monitors, I use a lot of budget monitors, a lot of high-end monitors, a lot of those mid-grade monitors, and a lot of them are really enjoyable to use, especially at a lower price point. However, this monitor does everything perfectly. It really doesn't compromise on anything. You have the black levels, you have the speed, which is something you usually compromise on with an IPS versus a VA panel. There's no ghosting. It has really low input lag. It has great viewing angles. The brightness is fantastic. It has good HDR. So you really don't compromise on anything. And when you're in game and the colors are absolutely stunning and the brightness is fantastic, and then there's no ghosting and everything just piles together into the perfect gaming experience, really how you're supposed to game, how these games were made to be played. So this is perfect. It was actually amazing, absolutely fantastic, such an enjoyable gaming experience. However, there's basically one single con, and that is potential for burn-in. So let's talk about that now. OLEDs have a reputation for burn-in, and with my personal experience with burn-in with OLEDs over the course of my life using them, I've typically learned and known that OLEDs don't sometimes burn in, or if you leave it on, it burns in. They just degrade over time. That's kind of how I've experienced OLEDs, and that's kind of how they work. But Dell has implemented some stuff to increase its life expectancy and decrease potential for burn-in. Few things, basically three main things that we're gonna talk about. First, pixel shift. Now, when I unboxed this monitor, there were big bezels on the sides, smaller ones on the top, and the big chin on the bottom. However, there's actually a space of screen around that. I'm going to turn the ISO up on my camera so you can actually see it right now in this clip, but there's actually more screen that is being displayed because the image will actually shift just 2 or 3 pixels over to kind of make sure that there's no static image that's getting burned in. So that's a huge thing. That happens every few minutes and you don't really know that it's happening. So it's not going to be annoying, which is what I was kind of worried about once I kind of went through and read that. But after using it, even after just typing stuff out for, an hour or so, typing out some notes, and you can actually see it happening, but it's not annoying and it happens so little that it's not a big deal. But if that's the trade-off for having a much longer life expectancy, that's a great thing. The other thing that it has is when you go over 1,500 hours on the monitor, 1,500 hours of usage, it does a full panel refresh, which is awesome. But this is the third thing that they do to combat burn-in or kind of get you to buy this, even though you know burn-in is a potential thing that might happen, is they offer a 3-year warranty, not offer it. I don't know what I said, offer it. It comes with it. You get a 3-year warranty when you buy this for burn-in specifically, which is very cool. That means they're standing behind their product. If you have any burn-in for the first 3 years, it's covered. That is a big thing. Now, if you're planning to buy a high-end premium monitor and then keeping it between 5 and 7 years, maybe up to 10 years, a long time, I wouldn't recommend this monitor. I would go for an LG IPS ultrawide like the LG34GP83AB. That one is $800. It's $500 less than this. But overall, in its life, it's probably going to last longer because it's not going to have that burn-in issue that OLEDs do have. However, most of the people spending the price of this monitor are probably only going to keep this maybe 1 to 3 years. If I was going to buy this monitor, and I might actually buy this monitor for my personal setup, I'm probably going to upgrade after a few months or every year at least. So if you're also like that, you want to be on the cutting edge, I wouldn't even worry about burn-in because you have that 3-year warranty on the burn-in plus the pixel shift plus the refresh. So overall, I am confident recommending this. Even though OLEDs do have potential for burn-in, I feel comfortable recommending this because of all of these things, which are implemented very well, I think. Okay, now the menu system and control. So firstly, how you control it is with a single joystick under the bottom chin like LG, which is great. Not having all of those weird buttons that sometimes Dell does, which I don't like. That is good that they're listening, maybe not to me, but they're listening to the overall community. It's easy to access, it's easy to use. There's not really any learning curve. Now, the actual menu system itself, yeah, it falls short. I think it's overall fine, it's usable. It takes a second to get used to it, but really just a second. You're like, oh, that's what that means, this what this means. and then you're done. And then it's really easy to use. However, it doesn't match the beautiful aesthetic of the outside of the monitor because they put a ton of design work into the outside of the monitor, but then the menu system is not quite up to par. Weird to me. I think that Dell Alienware should definitely first have a different menu system between Alienware and Dell to kind of push people to buy the more premium Alienware stuff. And secondly, hire a graphic designer like LG did and upgraded their menu system a ton, just made it look cool, have cool transitions, stuff like that, just make it feel like a more premium product. So I would say it's just average. It works well, but it's not super pretty, but it is functional. All right, but moving on to Vesa Compatibility. This is compatible with 100mm by 100mm Vesa mounts, but because of the cool stand design, this actually uses a bracket. However, it's not a big deal at all because it's a snap-in bracket, and it does also come with Vesa mounting screws. So you can see there's this bracket that just clips in just like the monitor does itself, which is actually really cool because if you want to take this off of a monitor arm or something like that, it would be the same way as taking this off of the stand, which is just a little clip and it's basically a quick release. So this is actually a better system than just screwing it into the back of the monitor where the clip-in stand would be. So A+ for that. That's awesome. All right, but now for ports, this has two HDMI 2.0s, one DisplayPort 1.4, a USB Type-B upstream, and then 4 USB Type-A downstreams with a location being under the front chin for 2 of those USBs and then 2 of them in the back. And then it also has 2 3.5mm audio outs, one behind and one in front with those other 2 USBs. Very convenient for charging headphones and such like that. Kind of surprising that there's no USB Type-C for laptops and Mac. Also disappointing that there's no HDMI 2.1, but those are small inconveniences. All right, but moving on to stand and build quality, it's absolutely amazing. If you want the most premium outside of a monitor, the most premium stand, beautiful quality, well put together, this is it. It doesn't really get much better than Alienware. The design on this monitor is probably my favorite looking monitor ever. It is absolutely stunning and way better than Samsung, even though some of their monitors look cool. This one is just, it's clean, but it's also like gamery, but it's not overly gamery. Alienware does a fantastic job. All the materials feel good. There's a lot of matte white on it. It just feels good. And it also isn't gonna get or look dirty over time. Also, I'm gonna mention that there is a fan inside of this monitor. You can hear it kick on sometimes, but it's not super loud. Definitely not an issue for me. But as far as adjustability, this has height, tilt, swivel, and it has a little bit of rotation. Now, all of those feel really good, really smooth, and really high-end to use, except for the rotation. So the rotation only goes like this, just a little bit back and forth to kind of level it on the desk. Most ultrawides do this. However, this one is actually really hard to fine-tune, and you really want to fine-tune this. So that was kind of strange to me. It wasn't my favorite because it took me a little bit of time to actually get that level. So that wasn't my favorite, but every other part of this is fantastic. And then one of my favorite parts of the stand is the cable management, which is probably the best cable management I have ever used on a monitor before. It goes up through the bottom back of the monitor stand, so it's completely hidden. It then comes up, and the power is on the left side, and the other connections, like the display connections and stuff like that, are on the right side if you're looking at the back of the monitor. And it all is just channeled easily, and it completely hides the cables, no matter if you're in the highest or lowest setting. It's done really well. You'll even see in a bunch of the shots, I didn't hook the cable behind the thing. So this shot is not hooked behind, and then this shot is hooked behind. So I'm sorry for some of the B-roll shots having the cable hang down. It's very annoying to me right now, but it's absolutely fantastic. They also do include a cover for the back, which goes over that cable section. However, it's a little bit hard to install, and honestly, you don't need it unless you're gonna see the back of your monitor a lot. All right, now before we move on to price and value, we have to talk about the RGB because there is some. The RGB gets reasonably bright. It will hit the wall, but it's not super bright. So it will definitely add a little bit to your setup. However, it's not super bright. It does have a lot of different customizable colors and stuff like that. I think you can also download an application where you can customize the Alienware FX, which is what they call it. But overall, yeah, it can be customized a lot. There's different settings and stuff like that. But again, it doesn't really glow off the wall a ton unless it's pretty close to the wall, but it is cool to have it. But now price and value. This thing comes in at $1,300. That's what it retails for, and that is a lot of money for an ultra-wide monitor, especially a 34-inch ultra-wide monitor, pretty much top end. However, this is actually incredibly reasonable considering that the competition like LG, which has or historically has had a massive, the biggest amount of ultra-wides on the market, one of their top-end IPS panels, 34 inches, same resolution, is an IPS, similar specs, but not an OLED. That one's priced at $1,300. Now, I loved that monitor, and it's a fantastic monitor, but this one is just a better monitor because it is an OLED. Now, again, that one's not gonna have burn-in. This one has potential for burn-in, but you're absolutely set for at least 3 years. So I would probably 10 out of 10 times go with this one over the LG. However, if you are in that category where you wanna buy a premium monitor, then keep it for 7 to 10 years, I would go with the LG 34GP83AB, which is $800, so $500 cheaper. But man, I don't know if we've seen a high-end OLED priced like this, maybe ever, with all of these amazing specs, stats, and overall a beautiful image. So overall, do I recommend this? Absolutely. If you want the highest end 34-inch ultrawide out there, this is it. And it is so, so good. Again, if you want to check it out, there are Dell.com links below, and I will also link below the LG 34GP83AB in case you do want to go for an IPS over an OLED, save a little bit of money, but still, this one, so good. I am highly considering buying this for myself. But yes, this was Type-C Tech Reviews. If you want to check out the unboxing, it'll be right here. And please subscribe if maybe you want some other monitor reviews, unboxings, stuff like that. That is all I do on this channel, and I love doing it. This is Type-C Tech Reviews, and I'll see you guys in the next video.